Good morning, everybody. This is Lee Hornbeck for the Times Union. Welcome back to another of our webinars. We're going to talk about everything that's going on in real estate. Today, we are focused on how hard it is to buy a house right now. So the market is changing, but historically for the last year, 2 years, anyone who's in the market to buy a house may have found how difficult it is because there's low inventory. Your bid might have been rejected a bunch of times. You might find yourself really frustrated. So we brought together 3 experts today to talk to you about how to make sure your bid's accepted, how to remain patient, how to put all of the pieces in place so that you're going to be successful in the end and in the house that you actually want to have. So let me introduce a couple of people. We've got Brandon Porterford, who is a sales team leader with First Priority Mortgage. He's going to really tell us about what the rising interest rates mean and how that translates to borrowing money. We've got Christian Klug from Amsterdam, who is a assistant district manager, leads the Val Mills and Amsterdam office for Howard Hanna, and Joel Koval, who's been in the business for 35 years, has worked on many levels of real estate in sales, property rehabilitation, management, has been through several cycles of the market. So he's really someone we can turn to talk about perspective. So I'm going to start with Brandon. One of the things that's really led the news is the Fed's raising the rate. Okay, so what does that mean for you if you're looking to borrow money to buy a house? Brandon, go ahead and take that for us.
Right. So I know there's been a lot of worry about what rates are doing and with the recent spike and what that means in terms of buying a house in today's market. And I just want to start off by saying, even though rates have gone up, they're in the 6% range right now for a 30-year conventional, they are still historically low, the lowest that they've been. So what we haven't seen is the rise in rates so quickly. So for example, in the beginning of the year in January, rates were still pretty low in the 3% range, okay? Now, over the course of 6 months, the rate has doubled. Like I said, we're in the 6% range now. And what that means for a buyer is that it's just more a month, your monthly payment is higher for the same price range that you may have been looking in the beginning of the year when rates were low. For example, if you take a $300,000 loan and you do the math based off of where rates were in the beginning of the year till now, there's a difference of about $460 a month in payment. Okay, for the same price range, it's costing you about $460 more a month now than it did in January. That's a big deal. You know, it's a lot of money. So now we have to have more conversations with your loan officer and say, hey, do I still qualify for the price range that I was looking in when rates were lower? That's first and foremost. Second, are you comfortable with that increase in pay? Do we need to adjust your pre-approval letter and maybe reduce your purchase power so that you're comfortable with that monthly payment? The main thing that I'm seeing with my buyers, especially the first-time buyers, is that if they didn't quite or barely qualify when the rates were low, they're being knocked out of the market now and they just don't qualify for the same price range. Okay, so now we have to have more conversations. Hey, maybe we can get a cosigner and keep you in the market with where rates are today. Do you have more money that you could put down to lower that monthly payment? I'm also seeing the increase in folks interested in paying points. You can buy your rate down and lower your rate that way. So I think now with the rise in rates and the environment that we're in, more than ever, you have to communicate with the loan officer so that we're all on the same page with regards to the numbers and, kind of help you navigate the market that we're in right now.
Thank you so much for that. So Joel or Christian, do you want to jump in on that at all? Because I'm sure you're seeing buyers talk about that. Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so everything that Brandon said is spot on. There's a couple things I tell buyers is that I put up a Facebook post on my page the other day, and I just asked people, if you're over the age of 40, I'm 40, so I took that. If you're my age or older, what did you pay on your first mortgage? And I had 60, 70 comments, and the average was 9.5%. I know my first mortgage in 2002, when I bought my first house 20 years ago, was 7.25%. And at the time, people said that was amazing, for a 21-year-old. So to a degree, I tell buyers that if you can afford the payment, like Brandon said, check. If you can afford it, this is back to the new normal. I don't expect we're going to see rates under 5% again. So, if you're going to wait for rates to go down, you may not buy a house in the next decade. Right. And so here's the reality. Rates are either going to go up, they're going to stay the same, or go down. One of those three. Right. If rates go up and you buy a house now at 6, you're going to feel like a hero a year from now if rates go to 8%. Right. And if rates go down, you're just going to refinance like we've all been doing for the last 10 years. So as long as you can afford the payment, I tell buyers, don't get too worked up about it. Here's the other benefit. We are seeing buyers drop out of the market, but instead of seeing 10 offers on a property, we're seeing 3, 4, or 5. So it's still a strong market, but there's not quite as much competition, which is actually great news for buyers. So that's just some of the quick stuff I tell to my buyers, regarding the interest rate stuff.
One thing I'll throw in is if you want a rate under 5, it's still available. Go to a 10-1 ARM. It's a great product. You can lock your rate in for 10 years. And if you look at the difference in the payment on a $250,000 mortgage, a 30-year fixed right now is going to give you a payment that's close to $1,500, a little under $1,500 for principal and interest. But if you go to a 10-1 ARM at today's rates on the 10-1 ARM, it drops down to a little over $1,200. So you have a savings of almost $400 a month. And if you do the math on it, at the end of the 10 years, if you took a 30-year fixed right now at current rates, or a 10-1 ARM at current rates, at the end of 10 years, you're going to owe about $11,000 less on the 10-1 ARM. So you got to ask yourself, is there not going to be an opportunity at some point in 10 years to refinance at a lower rate? And if there's not, I've got a savings on what I owe at the end of 10 years. The worst case scenario on these 10-1 ARMs is typically a 5% increase, which is going to put you at 9, but 9 with a lower principal. So it's really an option that people should be considering in today's market.
Hey, Julie, bring up a great point with the 10-1 ARM, which I wanted to ask you guys a quick question. How long are folks staying in their homes these days anyway? Do you think they'd probably be moving on to the next house by the time that introductory rate expires anyway?
7 years.
7 years,
So,
the average.
yeah, just a good point. That's a great point. So,
I want to jump in and say ARM is adjustable rate mortgage.
yes.
Thank you.
I also want to add that everybody feel free to put questions in the chat. We're going to get to those at the end. We just have some questions to get through that might preempt some of your questions.
Let me jump real quick too. I worked with Joel for many years, and Joel, that was genius. I mean, Joel never ceases to amaze me in his insight. Like, I'm writing that down, 10-1 ARM. I learned something today. So thank you, Joel, for your many years of wisdom on that.
Anytime, Christian.
I feel like the deer holds all the wisdom, and he just taps into that guy.
That's it. I channel my deer.
Well, let's keep it on you. Let's talk more about this wisdom that you've accumulated from your years in the business. You've got some thoughts. I want to hear, based on the cycles that you've been through, the things you've seen already, where you think we're going.
Well, I've been doing this since 1984. So I've seen 3 major up-down cycles throughout my career. And that's not unusual for the typical span of an up-down cycle. One thing all cycles, when it comes to a boom market in real estate, tend to have in common are low interest rates relative to what they had been, and low unemployment. And we had both of those things in this current boom cycle that we've seen over the last couple of years. But in addition to that, we've had a couple outliers. One of those is that over a 10-year period since the crash in 2008, new construction is down significantly. So housing starts are way off, and we don't have the same number of new homes coming onto the market that we had traditionally had. If you go back into the 90s, housing starts nationwide ran 1.5 million, 1.6 million. We go to 2010, 11, a couple years after the crisis of 2008, housing starts were down to 500,000 houses, and this is for the whole country. So you have that issue. And then you have the issue of people tending to stay in their houses a little longer. So that affects the inventory. But the other wild card we saw over the last couple of years was pandemic related. So we had a lot of stimulus money come into the market, whether it be stimulus checks or PPE money to business owners, and nobody had any place to spend it. You couldn't go to a restaurant, you couldn't travel, there was no leisure spending going on. So people accumulated this money in these accounts. And on top of that, we're spending more time around their own house looking around and saying, well, maybe it's time to upgrade. And they had the money to do it. So that was a factor. Then you had the other factor of people coming from areas that traditionally we hadn't seen before. So when you could work from home, you didn't need to live in New York City any longer. You didn't need to live in Boston. So you could take the money it would have cost to buy a brownstone in Brooklyn and have a mansion up here in East Greenbush. And so people took advantage of that, and we saw a lot of people come from downstate to get to a more affordable area. That's something I saw in California in the late 80s when the Los Angeles basin started to get priced out for a lot of people. People started buying in Pomona and Rancho Cucamonga and places like that, and they commuted into work so that they could have an affordable house. And we saw that here really I think for the first time, because people were able to work from home with a business traditionally that was based in New York City or one of the other big cities where things were more expensive.
Let me jump on that as well. I live on the lake up here on Great Sacandaga Lake, and we've seen that exact trend. Just the other day, I was working with a buyer from Long Island, young family, and their price point to purchase is close to 7 figures. And we just wouldn't have seen that 5-10 years ago with someone who grew up in this area. So we're seeing buyers move up from downstate, young families who are going to push the market higher. And then of course we have the second home market. There's no end to the second home market. Airbnb is a huge factor in pushing prices up, and that trend's not going to end. Just yesterday I had a buyer who wants on the water at a price point, and I'm like, you're not going to find that, but here's one for $250,000 higher, but I found a way for you to afford it. The current owner is renting it for $700 a night. They've got great rental history. You need to rent it for 28 days a year to pay for an extra $250,000 in the mortgage. And suddenly the buyer goes, oh yeah, maybe I could afford that level of a home if I'm willing to rent it out for a couple weeks a year.
And that's a new trend. The Airbnb, the VRBO. I owned a house on Sacandaga Lake that I sold a couple of years ago. It sat empty for 250 nights a year because I never thought of renting it out on a daily basis. Well, I sold it to a guy who rents it out for $750 a night. Now I'm kicking myself. Look at all that money that I got missed out on. I'm kicking myself for selling it. But that is a relatively new phenomena that people are really only starting to catch on to in the last year or two.
We can expect to see some changes in that though, right? I mean, the municipalities the municipalities are starting to get nervous about that. They want a piece of that money, basically.
They do.
Yeah. So I know I just sold a house in Lake George Village, and it was not allowed to do STRs, short-term rentals. That's actually the word we should be using, because Airbnb is simply a platform. So we like to call them an STR, or short-term rental. So this house specifically in Lake George, not on the water, the zoning does not allow for short-term rental. It has to be rented for more than 30 days. So we have to start looking at that if municipalities are passing laws. And sometimes they pass these laws on a Tuesday night with 6 people in attendance and nobody knows. And so as realtors, we're really trying to watch what every township is doing in our markets to see how that's going to impact.
And to be fair, it's not just that the municipalities want a piece of the money, the way they get occupancy tax from hotels, but that there's been some complaining in Lake George in particular by neighbors who, where the short-term renters are not behaving as you would want them to behave.
Absolutely
but-
true. I was down in Florida a couple weeks ago looking at houses down there, and they've got a lot of restrictions now in the more traditional residential neighborhoods against the short-term rentals, and I don't blame them. I mean, if I lived down there year-round, that was my home. Do I want to see a new neighbor every weekend coming in, rolling in with their keg of beer in the back of the pickup truck, and there for a good time? I wouldn't want to see that. So I don't blame the municipalities for starting to control this.
I mean, I think it's a question too of who should be in charge of that. I mean, I've had conversations with the leaders of Airbnb, and they do bring in new rules and say, we're not, they don't rent to someone from within the same town, because when that's the case, it's usually a party house situation that you've got to kind of lock down on that. So whose responsibility is it? The platform that's making the money off it. But that's probably a whole other webinar. I want to hear your advice. So, Brandon, let's start with you. We had talked about when for everyone who's listening, when we prepped for this, we talked a little bit about money down and how people still feel like they've got to have 20% down, which is often not the case. So I want to talk to Christian and Joel about, ways to kind of sweeten your deal when you're trying to buy a house. And that was a good suggestion, Christian, about, look at the money you can make from renting it. But going into it, it's so intimidating. It's so much money. It's the biggest purchase that most of us are ever going to make. What are some things that maybe are not well known in terms of things you can consider when you think that you're going to be shut out of buying? Brandon, you start with financing.
Right. So you make a great point. I talk to a lot of first-time home buyers who still think that in order to get a conventional loan, you have to put 20% down, or you need a 760 credit score. And it's just not the case. We have a lot of first-time home buyer programs that will allow you to put as low as 3% down. And that really does help that first-time home buyer who's just getting started, that may not have a lot of cash to work with. Those options are available, and a 620 score is high enough to get the job done. So adding that extra piece of education, I think, is everything. Knowing is half the battle when it comes to this stuff. And there's another loan program that is called Sunny Mae. Now that stands for the State of New York Mortgage Agency, and they only do loans in New York State, but they have what's called a down payment assistance loan. It's a 0% interest loan where you can basically take that money and use it to help you with your closing costs and your down payment. Okay. Now, Sunny Mae had an awesome program last year, and it was a promotional thing, and it didn't last very long, but they were offering a $30,000 down payment assistance loan. And I was able to help a lot of families with that program that may not have been able to buy a home if they didn't know about it, and that is a conventional loan, that Sunny Mae program that I'm telling you about. There's also other options like USDA, for example. That's another loan program that many don't know about. It's a 0% down loan. The home has to be in a location that's USDA eligible. So there's a map that you plug in the address, and it tells you yes or no if that home is eligible. But that's another program that, hey, if you have the credit and you have the work history and the income, but not necessarily the down payment, that's another program that can get you a home sooner than later. Okay. So
are there income requirements on that? Do you have to be kind of under a certain threshold to be eligible for a lot of those?
Right. So the USDA program I mentioned, they just recently increased the income limits for that. So for a family, for a 1 to 4 family household, that income limit is about $122,000 a year. The Sunny Mae program I told you about, there are 2 different programs that you could qualify for, and that have 2 different income limits. Basically, it comes down to the interest rate. If you want the lower interest rate, it's called the Achieve the Dream program, and the income limit for that program for a 1 to 2 family is about $77,000 annually. Now, if you're a 3 to 4 family, 3 plus basically, that jumps up to about $88,000 a year. And for the second program, if you have a 1 or 2 family household, the income limit is about $95,000 a year. So there's some different options there, for your first time buyer. If they have if they're under the income limit, they've got the credit, those are great programs to give them a fighting chance in this market.
Christian or Joel, do you want to jump in terms of how you've other stories that you have from your arsenal, either from yourself or realtors that you mentor who have
I've
helped?
got a few things that
Yeah.
I think are helpful.
Thank
So first off, if you're working with an agent and you're looking to buy a house, have your agent contact the listing agent to find out from the seller what their hot buttons are. Sometimes it's something as simple as, when are they looking to move? How can you coordinate your closing date with what works for the seller? That's a real important piece. Do they have any concerns about offers that they have coming in? The next thing I would look at, and this has been a trend over the last few years, where people get a pre-qualification letter that is equal to the amount that they're offering. Get the pre-qualification letter as high as you can get it, because I can assure you, as a listing agent, if I have a house that we're asking $250 for, and I have an offer and the pre-qualification letter says they're qualified for $250, and I have another pre-qualification letter that says they're qualified for $300, all things being the same, I'm going to take the offer that says the people are qualified for $300. Now, the people who have the letter that says they're qualified for $250 may actually be qualified for more, but the lender gave them a pre-qual letter that said $250.
That's right.
Max that pre-qual letter out. I've heard agents say, well, I don't want to do that because then the seller's going to think they can pay more. Well, if you went to Price Chopper to buy a dozen eggs, did they ask you how much money you got in your pocket when you check out, or do you pay for the dozen eggs? It doesn't make sense.
Joel, can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
Now, Joe makes a great point about the pre-qualification part of it, but a lot of folks, there's also two levels of qualifying for a mortgage. You can get pre-qualified and you can also become pre-approved. Okay, so pre-approval, especially in this market where it's so competitive, a pre-approval is a stronger qualification. That means that the borrower has given your loan officer, all their credit documents, pay stubs, W-2s, tax returns. An underwriter has actually looked at those items and issued a pre-approval. Okay, and when you're in a competitive situation where there's multiple offers, how nice is it to have a stronger qualification than all of the other buyers with a pre-approval that says, hey, this is basically a mortgage in hand. So that's another great tip that we've been using. You see the emergence of more pre-approvals over a pre-qualification with it, which is just all verbal. If I'm on the phone with a buyer and they tell me their salary, their income, I'm just going off of what they say. I have not actually seen any documentation to back up what they're saying. So getting a pre-approval over a pre-qualification is definitely the way to go in this market to make your offer more attractive. So just want to throw that in.
Great.
Thanks, Joel.
So I think one of the big things, let's tie this back to the lake market again, is when you're making your offer, inspections are always a sticking issue. Many realtors are not comfortable advising their buyers to make an offer with no inspections, and that's understandable. But you need to have that conversation with your realtor, especially with properties where the land is a higher percentage of the value. If you're in Clifton Park or Colony or Gilderland in a subdivision, your land is probably 10 to 15, maybe 20% of the overall value. When you're up on the lake, many times the land is over 50% of the value. In some cases, it's 75 or 80%. I've got a couple listings right now where I'm like, I don't really know if this house is going to last. It's probably going to be torn down. It might be a 600 purchase, but the land's 450. So what are you really inspecting at that point? You're only protecting, 10 or 20% of the purchase price by doing an inspection. So educating your buyers to know that you're really buying the land, and you don't have to worry so much about the structure if you're going to tear it down anyway. So as is inspections or as is offers are always going to take precedent if you've got 5 or 6 offers.
Which is a great point. But even here in Clifton Park, now I would be hard pressed to recommend that somebody buy a house without an inspection. And I know what I'm looking at, but as their agent, do I want to be out on the hook saying, yeah, the house looks good to me? I don't. But what I would recommend to people is get a hold of a reliable inspector and bring them with you when you're going to take a look at the house. Spend an extra 20 minutes there and have him do at least a quick inspection and look for big majors, because that may put you over the top in being able to make an offer without an inspection contingency.
one
So-
more thought I
So
had.
go ahead, please do.
First
That's
time
why
home
we're here.
is I really encourage my buyers who are on the lower end of income to consider buying a multi-unit. It's probably one of the regrets I have in life is my first house I bought was on the lake as a single family, which I ended up doing okay on it, but still I should have bought a 2, 3, 4 unit. I could have gotten an owner occupant 30-year mortgage. I could have lived in it for 2 years and then I could have moved out and used how much? 80% of the income, I believe, Brandon, right? So then you can use that income to help cash flow your next purchase because Brandon can use it as part of the income. So, especially in your areas, like I live close to the Village of Northville. The Village of Northville used to be super affordable for first-time home buyers. It's not. It's gotten very expensive. And so younger buyers are looking like, who can afford a home? Well, here's a 2-unit, here's a 3-unit. Live in one, the income from the other unit or the other 2 units almost pays the mortgage. You basically live for free for 2, 3, 4 years. And then you can use that income to buy the more expensive single family down the road.
I agree. I recommend that to first-time home buyers all the time. I wholeheartedly back that up because it's an investment in real estate. You want a diversified portfolio. You can't just have stocks and bonds. Real estate is an important part of it. And what better way to do it as a first-time home buyer to be able to get in with 3.5% down on an FHA mortgage? If I'm looking to buy right now on a non-owner occupied property, I'm going to put down 20%, 25%, 30%. As an owner occupant, I can get in for 3.5%. Do that while you're young. It's a great way to start your investment.
Absolutely, for the first house. I've done that many of times, especially when you have a first time home buyer who isn't happy with the current price range that they qualify for a single family. Like Christian said, I can use the rental income from those other units. Now I have more income I can use. Now you can go out and buy, maybe a better house in a higher price range. So yes, that's a great point. And also, Joel, the down payment requirements are huge as well for the first-time home buyer if they don't have a lot of cash to work with. An FHA loan will allow you to purchase anywhere from a single to a 4-unit home with only 3.5% down. As soon as you go conventional, that 3% first-time home buyer program I mentioned earlier, that's only for a single family. As soon as you go to a 2-unit, you either have to put 15% down or there's an option to put 5% down, which just changed, but there's an income limit for that program. So, your down payment requirement changes drastically if you go with the conventional option. So like Joel alluded to, if you can go after that multi-unit on the first go around, absolutely go for it.
Plus, you're providing more housing. Saying like, we have a housing shortage and all the small landlord situation, that's every step, every one of those multi-units is housing for renters as well.
Well,
Lee, I want to jump in on that housing shortage thing though, real quick. I'm sorry, Christian, but we talk a lot about a housing shortage, but what we really had last year was just an incredible demand. We sold as realtors over 10,000 houses, single family houses in the core 4 counties of the Capital District. That's a record. If we truly had a housing shortage, we wouldn't have set a record. What we have in truth is demand that outstrips supply. So even though the supply is pretty good, the demand is so high that it makes it look like we have a shortage.
What I was going to say too, with buying a rental property as an owner occ, the icing on top of this is, I own a couple dozen rental units myself, and the rent increases have been astronomical. And I mean, I think the statistic is 21% in the last 18 months is the rent increases. And I've been raising my rents with my tenants as little as possible, but have to stay with market. And you buy a 2, 3, or 4 unit as an owner occupant, and it cash flows today, likely 2, 3, 4 years from now. If you just do 5% or 10% increases, which is less than the market, another 2, 3 years from now, it could be an extra $200, $300, $400 of rental income every single month. So those rents, and they're not going to stop. Rents are not going to decrease at any point. They're going to continue to go up.
Yeah. Brandon, let's talk about loan products. So we got a lot. You talked about earlier, gentlemen, you talked about the downstate buyers coming in. Their money goes a lot farther. You've got cash buyers. And it's hard for borrowers to compete. And there's some loan products out there. It's so competitive, and you know, it's going to take longer if you're working off a VA loan or a non-conventional loan. So how do you help those people? How are you talking to them?
It's interesting you mentioned the cash buyers. We are seeing a lot of cash buyers, and we're in such a competitive market that you're seeing some pretty interesting programs being rolled out to keep our buyers competitive. For example, we recently rolled out a cash advantage program where we essentially take a buyer's offer and we turn it into a cash deal. The way we're doing that is we're guaranteeing the sale. So buyer has to qualify for the program. They have to have good credit. They have to be willing to put 20% down. If the home doesn't appraise, they have to be okay with paying the appraisal gap. Okay. And again, it's like a pre-approval. Remember when I said the difference between a pre-qualification and pre-approval? Well, this cash advantage, think of it as a pre-approval on steroids. Okay. Where we're essentially saying, hey, if something happens to our buyer, say they lose their job or God forbid, something horrible happens to them, our bank is guaranteeing the sale. The bank will purchase the home. And that is actually, I just looked at the stats recently. We've already done over 5 million in loans for that particular program, where there were multiple offers. We were able to get our buyer a cash advantage offer, essentially turning it into a cash deal. And that was enough for them to win out and get their offer accepted by the seller. So like programs like that, I'd never heard of anything like that before the market that we're in right now. So there's just some interesting programs out there that everyone should be aware of to make yourself a lot more competitive in the market that we're in today. But to finish your initial question about the other programs other than, I think you said VA and FHA. So those two loans are great loans. Right now, I'm a veteran myself, and it makes me sick to my stomach sometimes what's going on with the VA loan. That's a great loan for our veterans. It's 0% down, no mortgage insurance, and it's just a shame that it's not considered a competitive a loan option when it really is. It's not as restrictive as an FHA loan when it comes to some of the appraisal requirements, but it's still a great loan. But like I said, if you feel like you have to go VA or FHA, there are a lot of conventional programs, like I had spoke about earlier, for the first-time home buyer that are 3% down. They have Home Ready and Home Possible, or what those loan options are called. Because right now, you either have cash or they want conventional, is what sellers are looking for in this market. So we do have other options, for that first-time buyer if they want to go conventional. And again, that Sunny Mae program that I told you about with that down payment assistance loan, that is a conventional loan as well, with a conventional appraisal. So it's not as restrictive as an FHA appraisal. And those are some other tools too that folks may not know about. So hope that answers your question.
I'm going to stop you guys right here because I have an announcement to make and I almost forgot. So we have winners. We have winners to talk about. Our Hewitt's gift card. We had two $500 gift cards. Yay, Hewitt's, one of my favorite places. So I want to just announce who they are, and we'll get to you. So hold on. I've got Chris Ritterfold. Riddervold. You are one of our winners, Chris Ritterfold.
Hooray.
And the other one, hold on a second. Sorry, everybody. Okay. All right. You know what? I'm gonna pitch out my next question, and while our gentlemen here are talking, I will figure out who the other winner
If you want,
is.
Leah, there's a question in the
Oh.
Q&A that I can answer while you're looking that up if you want.
I've got it actually. Paula Tancredi Penman. Paula Tancredi Penman, you're a big winner. We're going to be in touch with you with your gift card. So, right. Are you talking about the question about buying lakefront?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Test.
Hold on, let me, for anybody who hasn't seen, I don't know that you all can see this question, so let me read it to you. It's a woman talking about wanting to buy lakefront and getting her offer accepted. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, her question was, do I need to use a local realtor? And so, I've been in real estate 20 years, and here's what I'll say. Realtors tend to cover a larger geographic area today than they did 20 years ago. So, I live on the Great Sacandaga Lake, but I do real estate in Clifton Park. I do it in Amsterdam. I do it in Albany, and I do it where I live. So it's not so much where your realtor lives, it's where is their knowledge base, right? So if someone called me to do something in Utica, like, no, I don't go to Utica. I don't know that market. If someone called me for Lake Placid, I don't know that market. And so there may be a realtor who just doesn't know that lake market. So same thing with like Brant Lake. If someone called me for Brant Lake, I know where Brant Lake is, but I'm not going there. So they just need to be knowledgeable and have expertise of that lake. We see on our lake very often realtors who don't know anything about the Hudson River Regulating District, which is a very big issue because they own our lakefront. It's very restricted. We've had people buy homes and not realize they didn't even own to the water. And it's like, holy cow, like who is advising them in that purchase? So just make sure that they're knowledgeable of that market. That's it.
Yeah. So there was one other question that I want to get to from the chat. Brandon, you can address this probably, or Joel, the barriers to getting the 10-year ARM. So versus a regular 15-year mortgage, are the requirements different? Is the income higher? Is there anything like that that makes it different?
Yeah, my initial thought is, when you're looking to buy a home, we're really looking for three things. It's your credit, your employment, so work history and income, and then, do you have the money for your down payment and closing costs? It's those three things, really. So in regards to that question, what are the barriers to getting a 10-year ARM versus a 15-year mortgage? First, I'd ask for the 10-year ARM, is it a 30-year mortgage for the 10-year? Because in that case, you need a little more income to qualify for the 15-year option because the monthly payment's higher, because you're paying that loan off over the course of 15 years instead of 30 years. So it really would just come down to talking to your loan officer and finding out income-wise if you could go the 15-year route because of the higher monthly payment associated with it. Would be the first thing. The income barriers, what I would call it.
Yeah.
So the short, concise answer is the 10-year is going to be easier to qualify for than the 15-year, because the 10 years amortized over a 30-year period, and you're going to qualify at that initial rate.
Yeah.
So you're going to be better off. You're going to easier qualify for a 10-year adjustable, which again, we call it an adjustable, but it's fixed for 10 years, than you will for a 15-year mortgage. And if you look at it, one of the exercises I've done recently is, what if I took that 10-year ARM at that lower rate, but paid like I got a 30-year fix at a higher rate?
Just gonna say that.
Yeah, if you go 10 years down the line, you're going to have over $50,000 better equity position if you went that route. And so there's no way that is not a better mortgage, in my opinion, than going with a 30-year fix. And like Brandon said in the beginning, 6% is not a terrible rate. I mean, the average over the last 35 years is closer to 8, but it's high compared to what it's been over the last 7 or 8 years. And I think that if you need it for qualifications, especially, it's a way to go. But it's a way to go either way, I think, when it's at 4 and change.
Yeah, I agree with Joel 100%. Yeah, if you go with that 10-year ARM and just make your payments as if it was a 15-year, or do like bi-monthly payments, I highly recommend that, because you'll literally shave years off your mortgage by doing that. And why not keep your monthly payment low, just in case, life happens and you need the extra cash? At least you can make your monthly payment, and then when you have a little extra cash flow, you can pay it down as much as you want. So, great point there.
I think we've heard some kind of scary things about ARMs over the years. During the recession, people were like shocked. But here's the thing: you got to stay on top of it. If you know what you're doing, you know what you're getting into. You're getting good advice. I can't believe, Christian, that someone would help someone buy property on the Great Sacandaga Lake and not talk about permits and not talk about access.
Yeah.
That's so true too. I mean, every lake has its own picadillos, right? I mean, Lake George is different from Great Saginaga. But anyways, my point about arms is that just know what you're doing. Read the fine print. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've run into this where someone's complaining about an easement or FAA restrictions. It's like, it was there in the deed when you did the deal. You know, you please look at it. Please read the fine print. Please do your research.
Well, yeah, I can tell you that my first mortgage in 1988 was an adjustable rate, negatively amortizing loan that started at 8 3/4 but had a note rate that was higher. So every month I made my payment and my principal went up. And I owed like 15,000 more on the house 5 years later than when I started. But that was the type of loans that were out there in the 80s. You don't see those loans
No.
any longer.
You can't do that anymore.
Even know
Yeah,
what you
so
just
adjustable
said,
rates
Joel.
are
That's
much
crazy.
safer than they used to be.
Yeah, that's why 2008 happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a much, Christian said, well, he asked what were people's first loans. Mine was ugly. But you know what? It was how I got into a house in Southern California when I was 28 years old. I mean, you needed to do what you needed to do.
Yeah.
I don't see other questions from the audience. I have another question for you guys, kind of for us to end on. And you've addressed this a little bit, but should buyers stay out of the market until things get better? Because what I'm hearing is absolutely not. Let's look at all of history. Let's look at the fact that mortgage rates are still low, but they are going to go up. I feel like as buyers, you're suddenly squeezed by something else. So you had the low inventory. We've been dealing with that. High demand, low inventory. That's the question, Joel, right? Is it really low inventory? Is it high demand?
Right.
But now with mortgage rates going up, it's an extra squeeze. So sometimes, and the third thing, I guess, really is if you're renting, not that you're in a smaller house and you want to trade up to a bigger house, but if you're renting and your rent's gone up 20-30%. So what's your advice in terms of, should people just go for it? You know, despite the fact that the reality is we're not going back to that 3.5% interest rate. So should we go for it? Brandon, you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, rates are still historically low, right? I think that you should definitely talk to a loan officer and find out what you can do today, what your buying power is. And even though rates are, over 6% for a conventional loan, remember, if you keep renting, I mean, that's 100% interest. You're never going to get that money back. At least when you own, you can build some equity and do some things with that moving on in the future, right? So would you rather have a 6% rate or 100% interest rate? That's my thought on it. So yeah, absolutely. Now is still a great time to buy. And you just need to make sure you have those necessary conversations with your loan officer and your realtor to make sure everyone's on the same page to help you navigate what's a competitive market these days. But yeah, to answer your question, you should definitely still look into purchasing.
Brandon, there's a question that you might want to look at real quick while you're looking at that. I'll
So actually a colleague, I won't name her, but a colleague, and it's a good question. We have faced this in my own family in terms of what are we doing with those student loans because the rate is so much higher. But is it better to save cash for a down payment or pay off student loans if the student loan rate is lower than the mortgage rate? Girl, you did good about consolidating your loans because the rate is still lower. But Brandon, go ahead.
I would say go after the home before rates go up even higher. I would save the cash. And again, student loans, the way we calculate student loans, as far as in relation to your buying power, if they're in deferment, I mean, we're not really counting those student loan payments. You're only counting like 0.5% of the loan balance, right? So I would hate for you to miss out on the market today and being able to secure a home today because of your student loans. I think if you can purchase now and you have the money for your down payment now, I would absolutely put that towards a down payment on a home first, and then settle up with the student loans afterwards.
Maybe they'll be forgiven for journalists too, right?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't see that coming. But On
Someone's
any
gotta
of
pay
those
for it.
last 2 points, Christian or Joel, do you want to jump in on, should you buy now? Should you wait? Should you, any of that? Do you want to jump
Yeah,
in on?
I'm closing on a property next week personally. I've got another one in contract I'll close on next month. I always tell people, I'm going to tell you, I put my money where my mouth is. So if I'm not buying, I'm going to tell you I'm buying. But if you think you're going to buy and sell in the next year or two, probably not a smart idea, right? If you think you're going to buy and move in a year or two and have to sell the property, I'd be a little concerned about that. But if you're going to buy and hold for 5 or 10 years, I'm buying income properties. It is what it is. And if you buy high and the market goes down and then you move, well, the house you go buy next is going to be cheaper too. So it's all relative, right?
Yeah,
Joel?
like Christian, I'm still a buyer. I bought another duplex last year. I can tell you this, if you're waiting for prices to come down before you buy, don't hold your breath because you're going to turn blue. We may see a little bit of a downslide here, 1% or 2%, but more likely we're just going to move sideways for a number of years. Even in 2008, which was the worst real estate market nationwide that we'd seen since the Depression, we saw a backslide in prices locally about 4%, and the next year they were up 5%. So, there wasn't any real reduction in values over a couple-year period. I think as a buyer, however, you're probably going to see the multiple bids slow down a bit. You're probably going to have a little more time to make your decision. You're probably going to have a little more selection to choose from over the next 6-8 months. But look at it as an opportunity, and I would not be waiting for prices to come down because it's unlikely that they're going to come down in any significant way. And you're probably going to be looking at a higher interest rate even if they came down. So your payment's not going to change at all.
Here's the last thing I say. I was in real estate in 07 with the boom. Any one of us would love to pay 07 boom prices today.
Yeah.
Right. So if you bought in 07, in 09, you felt like a schmuck, right? Because you're like, crap, I just lost 25% of my value. No one thinks we're going to drop by 25% this time. But by 2015, you were like, oh, I'm not too bad. And then by 2020, you feel like you're the smartest guy in the room. So, even if there's a small correction, I think 99 out of 100 people are going to look down the road 5-10 years and say, pretty sure that we're going to look back at 2022 prices and say, hey, do you remember when you used to be able to get stuff under $1 million on the water? I'm saying that now. Do you remember when you used to get stuff under $500,000 on the water? You can't find under $500,000 on the water anymore. It's done. It's over. It's not coming back. And we might be in the 6, 7, 8 range right now. I'm 40. By the time I'm in my 50s, I think it's going to be 7-figure and up only on our lake.
The worry I have about that is it's, who gets shut out of that market? Do you know what I mean? But I'll tell you that we just had our house appraised. We're going to borrow against the house to do some utility improvements, furnace, AC, the whole 9 yards. It's a 22-year-old house. All that stuff is going. And it's shocking. It's shocking how high it appraised compared to what we paid. That's what's encouraging people to go into the market, but we're not leaving town. We'd have to buy, right? So
Yeah.
not looking to do that right now. But there's one last question here. As you may know, viewers, I have a newsletter. I encourage you to sign up for it. It's brilliant. But I'm going to get some information from Brandon about down payment assistance. We had a question. Where best to go, kind of resources, and I'll put that in this week's newsletter. Feel free to sign up for that. That'll be in there. Gentlemen, I really appreciate your expertise. I learned stuff today. I've been covering this stuff a long time, and I learned stuff today. So thanks so much for your expertise. And Christian, Northville is adorable. Northville is cute. I understand why. I understand why the interest. I mean, what's better? Thanks very much, gentlemen, and have yourselves a great day.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye. Bye, everybody.